So Geeta, thanks for being here today and great job on the Today Show this week.
Well, thank you. That was a lot of fun. It's really been an exciting opportunity to try to get information and messaging out beyond Duke walls as well.
Well, it's so important that real experts that know the science are out there. So I really appreciate our faculty being willing to do that. So currently, we know about 10 million have received the vaccine nationwide. And as I mentioned earlier, about 10,000 at Duke. So, but there continues to be significant concerns regarding safety. And I know you've been very much engaged in kind of monitoring the data as it evolves. So what is our current understanding about the safety or side effects of the COVID vaccines?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know that it's really a main focus for people, especially given all the things that have been involved in the speed to get vaccines approved or under the emergency use authorization, and a lot of the things out in the sort of political world and climate that seem to have maybe impacted how the vaccine might have gone through trials or even been approved. I think first and foremost in the studies, we know that there were very few safety concerns, if any at all, and mostly focused on side effects. And now what we know from data from the CDC, they put out information last week in their MMWR about vaccines received in individuals through December 23rd. So those first sort of 11 days or so of the vaccine campaign. And what we know is that it looks very similar to what we saw in the trials, that it's still very common for individuals to have side effects we expect from vaccines. Very common to see pain and swelling or redness at the injection site.
Right.
Also reporting of kind of feverish or fever symptoms, more so in that second dose of the vaccine, regardless of whether you get the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine. In the trials, it was around 3 to 5% of individuals that had a fever after the first dose. Again, mostly very mild, and that goes up to about 15% or so after the second dose. But what's been interesting, as you know, Mary, that there has been this sort of phenomenon about allergic reactions to the vaccine,
Right.
particularly. I think what we, as physicians, obviously anybody out there getting a vaccine is going to be worried about an allergy or any medication allergy. But obviously, what we worry the most about in the medical space is about anaphylaxis or having a very severe reaction that could cause risk of, difficulty breathing, cardiovascular abnormalities, and so forth. So I'm just going to look at my data because I did actually write it down to see that data from the MMWR. And based on vaccination of roughly, I think it was at 11 cases per 1 million. So there were about 21 cases of anaphylaxis in that time period. The good news is that 70% of those all occurred within the first 15 minutes of vaccination. And so, that's actually what's recommended for anyone getting vaccinated right now. And then the remaining cases happened within 30 minutes following vaccination. And that's actually the time that's recommended for anybody that has a significant history of allergy or anaphylaxis is to be monitored for that 30 minutes. All the individuals that had those reports actually did fine. Some of them did go to the hospital and were evaluated and were treated, but everyone recovered and did fine without any significant sequelae or complications after that.
Well, I think there's a couple of things to remember. One is the denominator is very large. So we hear of individual cases, but the number being vaccinated is in the millions. The second is that there are healthcare professionals at vaccination sites.
Correct. That's right. And healthcare professionals that have all of the necessary medications and equipment to manage if individuals had an allergic reaction. So it isn't just that we'd watch it and see it happen. We're poised and ready, right, to manage that if someone needs epinephrine or other medications to control those allergies.
So has the CDC updated any guidelines relative to people with a history of allergies and vaccination?
Yeah, so the majority of those individuals that had those reactions had some history of allergy. So right now they haven't changed the recommendations, say if someone has like a food allergy or that sort of thing. One of the things that's tricky is that a contraindication is if you have an allergy to a known substance in the vaccine. The problem is this is a new vaccine, right? So there are things in it that people may not have had a history of receiving. There's a lot of evaluation ongoing for the polyethylene glycol or PEG substance that's in the two vaccines. And for people to understand why that's there, the way the mRNA vaccines we know, right, go in and help the body to make that spike protein, mimic the spike protein. But in order to get the mRNA into your cells, we need to make sure that it doesn't get degraded or digested
Right.
in some way, because that happens very quickly. So that PEG substance is part of the liposomal or the fat sort of molecules around the mRNA. So it's important that that gets there, but obviously we're monitoring that and need to figure out, as both Moderna and Pfizer have said, they are looking at new ways to sort of transport. Unfortunately, I don't think those things are going to come very soon in the time frame of sort of reformulating the vaccine. But we are monitoring all of that. I think one other thing to note for folks when they're getting vaccinated or having their family members come in for vaccines is to make sure about how we are monitoring it on a broad scale. Obviously, individuals being monitored in that short period of time when they get their vaccine, but then after the fact, how do we know that? Because the best way to answer
Right.
these questions is with data. So one of there are two things that are going on, and I think about the study that the DCRI is
Right.
leading
Yeah.
research. And so that is focused on healthcare workers receiving vaccination, and they're following that, and there's ways to sign up for that too. But the other one is the CDC's VSafe application, which is a mobile app. And VSafe is available to everyone when you go to get your vaccine and you get your instructions on what to look out for and what to monitor. It has information on VSafe, and it's a little QR code or an app, a website you go to and use that. And it pings you daily to ask you about your symptoms. And if you have any severe symptoms, it actually then connects you to a live person, like not in real time, but they will call you and follow up with you and document that information. And the other part that I know that, as you know, near and dear to my heart is about pregnant women. And so in the VSafe app, it actually asks you if you're pregnant. And so then they're planning to follow up with all pregnant women to look at their outcomes after the vaccination as well.
Well, and so we really want to encourage everybody to sign up and provide that information, because that's how we'll be able to learn more and more how we can best advise individuals. But the issue of pregnancy is one that is very relevant to our workforce. And there's both issues of safety relative to women that are pregnant. So can you address that first, what your thinking is? Because you have a long-standing expertise in this area.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing because having done vaccine research in pregnant women, it has been a sort of a niche area for me, and I'm excited that I've been able to use that experience now to help us understand things. So what we know about it, unfortunately, is somewhat limited by at least clinical trial data, because pregnant women were not included in the clinical trials.
Right.
There's a lot of ethical questions about whether that was the right thing or wrong thing. Obviously, we wouldn't want to just go into pregnant women without any data about efficacy first. So in a world outside of a pandemic, it would have been a natural progression to then begin clinical trials in pregnant women after phase 2 studies. Obviously, we're in a different setting right now. So I only say that to kind of not exactly completely beat up on our pharma colleagues, because they really have been done amazing work to get trials going forward so far. What I would love to have seen is that we were poised and ready to begin trials in pregnant women right as soon as the EUA were received. Both Pfizer and Moderna have stated that they are pushing to start trials in pregnant women in the first quarter of this year. But what we're advising folks right now is based on our scientific understanding and knowledge of how the vaccine works, and then how the physiologic aspects of pregnancy and the immune system. So based solely on how an mRNA vaccine works, there is really no significant concern biologically that it would cause harm to a fetus. There's been a lot of discussion out there, because when people hear mRNA, they automatically think of DNA, and whether that is something that could be causing alterations, right, in the developing fetus and the DNA. We know absolutely positively that mRNA can't get in the nucleus of the cell, so it can't get to the DNA and integrate in any way. So that's a given. The next questions become, are there concerns about the development of a fetus from the standpoint of, say, birth defects or malformations? That has not been the case in any vaccine that's ever been given to pregnant women. There is always this theoretical risk about live virus vaccines, for example, rubella vaccine. or varicella vaccine that can cause abnormalities in the fetus. But as you know, in these vaccines, they are not live virus vaccines, right? The mRNA molecule doesn't work that way at all. And then I think the other part is to note if there was some way that the vaccine molecule itself could get across the placentas of the fetus, could it actually cause an immune response in the fetus? You could argue that could be a good thing because then it could be generating antibodies as well. I think the concern that I've had at all that's ever been raised as a question is could that cause some sort of inflammation in the fetus or the placenta, just like it's causing inflammation in us when we have fever and pain and things like that. Talking to immunologists and vaccinologists, including those at NIH and FDA, those have not been concerns that have been that have been warranted. In addition, the developmental reprotox data from Moderna was part of their submission packet to the FDA as part of the EUA. Pfizer publicly described their data as part of the ACIP meeting in December, and they were planning to submit that data to FDA. It should have been submitted by now. That doesn't get published directly. It gets reviewed by FDA as part of the moving forward with the studies. But they have reviewed it, and we know in discussions with FDA folks from the vaccine group, as well as with the sponsors, both Pfizer and Moderna, that they have seen no abnormalities, no concerns whatsoever in the pregnant animal model studies with the vaccine.
So you put all that together, and so scientifically, and you're a scientist, there is nothing that would lead you to conclude that there would be a unique risk. That being said, you're also a practicing obstetrician, and very often it's a very personal decision. So what are you advising individuals?
So for me, I think it's an individual decision about risk-benefit analysis, right? So if you are a pregnant healthcare worker, say, who is working in the ICU caring for individuals that have COVID, your risk of exposure, even though we know PPE works, right? But your risk of exposure obviously is much higher than, say, us right now. They're able to work primarily from our offices and or from our home offices, and really have minimal exposure, right? Just from going to the grocery store or those sorts of things. So I think it really is, weighing those risks and benefits. I think the benefit of the vaccine for preventing disease is clear, right? At a 95% efficacy rate. And there's no reason to expect that to be different in pregnant women. So we know the vaccine works. We know it can prevent disease. And we also know that COVID infection in pregnant women is concerning. Again, with data across the country that the CDC has demonstrated in a couple of times now, shows that pregnant women are increased risk for not only hospitalization, but ICU admission, mechanical ventilation, ECMO, and even mortality. So we know the disease is bad, even worse in pregnant women. They're actually a priority group when we go to individuals with high-risk conditions. And we know that what your exposure risk may be, and weighing that with the scientific plausibility that vaccines should be safe. So I think those are the ways that I would talk to patients about making their decision.
And I think all the information that you provided really empowers individuals to have that discussion with their providers to really judge their own personal risk. So incredibly helpful. One other related issue is the issue of fertility. So I've heard that there is some sort of noise about concerns about fertility, and do you have any information there?
Yeah, I sigh because it's a bit disappointing that this has been raised as a concern, because it is a true misinformation campaign. Yeah. But working in the infectious disease fields, that the vaccine world has been fraught with these kind of issues for a long time. So what we know about the fertility issue is that it has been completely debunked. And I want to say that, our fellow colleague and who we admire and cheer on, Dr. Tony Fauci, has stated publicly and on Twitter even that there is no plausible hypothesis for the vaccine to cause infertility. What's been out there in the misinformation space is that the protein, right, the spike protein, when you look at the actual makeup of the protein, that there's a tiny little segment that looks similar to a protein called syncytin 1, which is in the placenta. And I mean tiny, like one sort of small segment of the protein that looks similar to the larger spike protein. There's no reason to think that. And so then the idea was that if you are generating antibodies to like the spike protein, then those antibodies are going to work against the syncytin protein in the placenta. That has not, that doesn't make sense, first of all, and it has not been warranted. And quite frankly, if that was the case, COVID antibodies generated from COVID infection would cause the same thing, right? And we're not seeing, thankfully, pregnant women who have had COVID, even though they have increased risk of COVID infection related complications, we are not seeing increased risk of complications related to pregnancy, for example, miscarriage, preterm birth, or stillbirth.
Well, it's so important to debunk the misinformation around what is such an important intervention for this pandemic. And so that's why I do think it's so important that people like you get out in front of the public and really make sure that the scientific data is out there. Are we going to, just as a final question, are we going to be participating in the studies that will include pregnant women?
Yeah, we are a site potentially for the Pfizer study. They're finalizing their site selections and so forth now. Moderna is a little bit going to be a little bit after that, so we haven't heard about that one yet. But I think the Pfizer one will be coming up pretty soon. So
oh, that's great. So Geeta, thanks so much for all that you do, and thanks everybody for joining us today. And have a safe and restful weekend.
Thank you, Mary. You too.